A shadowy figure, dressed head to toe in tactical gear, creeps through the empty halls of a Texas church, breaking windows, opening doors, waiting. Moments later, fitness instructor Missy Bevers walks inside, completely unaware she's about to be ambushed. Security cameras capture every chilling movement. Yet to this day, no one knows who this person is. No name, no face, no motive. Just one haunting question. Who killed Missy Bevers? And why? Stay with me, because this mystery only gets darker. The Long Island serial killer, LISK, murders. The Long Island serial killer, often referred to as LISK, is believed to be responsible for the deaths of at least 10 to 16 individuals whose remains were discovered along Gilgo Beach in Suffolk County, New York. The case, which came to light in 2010, remains one of the most baffling and haunting unsolved serial murder cases in modern American history. The mystery of LISK began when authorities were searching for a missing woman, Shannon Gilbert, a sex worker who had called 911 in a panic, saying someone was trying to kill her. Her disappearance led police to Gilgo Beach, where they stumbled upon the remains of 4 women in December 2010. All 4 victims were determined to be sex workers who had gone missing in previous years. The discovery set off a larger investigation, and by the following spring, authorities found more human remains, some of which belonged to victims whose deaths dated back more than a decade. The number of victims soon grew, with remains of women, a man, and a toddler, scattered across several miles of Ocean Parkway. The victims were mostly young women who advertised escort services online, leading investigators to believe that the killer targeted sex workers deliberately. The killer exhibited careful planning and seemed to operate with a high level of control, disposing of bodies in remote, difficult-to-search areas. Unlike many serial killers who leave behind clear forensic evidence, LISK managed to avoid detection for years, and his identity remained a complete mystery. One of the most chilling aspects of the case involved the family of one of the victims, Melissa Barthelemy. After her disappearance in 2009, her younger sister, Amanda, began receiving disturbing phone calls from a man using Melissa's phone. The caller taunted her with graphic and cruel messages, hinting at Melissa's fate and evading police attempts to trace the calls. The chilling nature of these calls suggested that LISK not only murdered his victims, but also took pleasure in psychologically tormenting their loved ones. The case took a major turn when authorities finally discovered the remains of Shannon Gilbert in December 2011, a year after the initial bodies were found. However, unlike the other victims, her cause of death was ruled as inconclusive, and police initially suggested she may have died due to accidental drowning in a marsh. Her family and their private investigator, however, strongly believed she had been murdered by the same person responsible for the other deaths. Gilbert's frantic 911 call and the strange behavior she exhibited before vanishing have fueled endless speculation about whether she was yet another victim of LISK, or if her death was unrelated. Over the years, numerous theories and potential suspects have emerged. Some investigators speculated that the killer could be someone familiar with law enforcement tactics, as he was able to evade capture and avoid leaving DNA evidence. Others believed he might be a local resident who knew the Gilgo Beach area well, allowing him to dispose of bodies without being seen. Several names have been suggested as possible suspects, including local businessmen, police officers, and even known criminals, but none have been definitively linked to the murders. One of the most intriguing leads came in 2023 when authorities arrested Rex Heuermann, a New York architect, in connection with some of the LISK murders. Heuermann was charged with the murders of at least 3 victims, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, after investigators matched DNA evidence and cell phone data to him. His arrest marked a major breakthrough in the case, but it left more questions than answers. Heuermann has pleaded not guilty, and while police believe he could be responsible for more murders, The full extent of his involvement remains unclear. Despite the recent arrest, many aspects of the LISK case remain unsolved. Some of the discovered remains did not match the known victims, raising concerns that the killer may have been active for far longer than originally believed. The discovery of a toddler's body near one of the adult victims also adds another disturbing layer to the case. Was she a child of one of the victims, or an entirely separate crime? No definitive answers have emerged. Over the years, investigators have faced numerous challenges in solving the case, from jurisdictional issues between different law enforcement agencies to accusations of police corruption and mishandling of evidence. Some former investigators believe that a more aggressive approach early on could have led to the killer's capture years ago. Meanwhile, the families of the victims continue to demand justice, hoping that recent breakthroughs will finally lead to closure. The Long Island serial killer case is a chilling reminder of how a predator can operate in the shadows for years, leaving a trail of devastation with few clues. Whether the case is finally nearing its resolution remains to be seen, but for now, LISK remains one of America's most terrifying unsolved serial killer mysteries. The Setagaya Family Murders. On the night of December 30, 2000, an entire family was brutally murdered in their home in Setagaya, a quiet suburb of Tokyo, Japan. The victims, Mikio Miyazawa, his wife Yasuko, and their two young children, Nina and Rei, were killed in a crime so bizarre and chilling that it has baffled investigators for over 2 decades. Despite the abundance of forensic evidence left behind, including the suspect's DNA, fingerprints, and clothing, the killer has never been caught. The case remains one of the most infamous and unsettling unsolved murders in modern history. The Miyazawa family lived in a nearly abandoned neighborhood that was slowly being cleared for redevelopment. Their house was one of the few still occupied in the area, making them particularly isolated. On the night of the attack, the killer entered their home through a second-story bathroom window, likely after climbing a nearby tree. Once inside, he targeted Mikio first, stabbing him multiple times with a sashimi knife. He then proceeded to kill Yasuko and their 8-year-old daughter Nina, using the same weapon. The youngest child, 6-year-old Rei, was strangled to death, possibly because he was unable to scream due to a pre-existing speech disability. What makes this case so eerie is the behavior of the killer after the murders. Instead of fleeing immediately, he stayed in the house for hours. Evidence suggests that he made himself at home, eating ice cream from the family's fridge, drinking tea, and using the bathroom. He even logged onto the family's computer, browsing the internet, and possibly attempting to erase his tracks. Some reports indicate he lingered until the early morning hours, only leaving after the sun had risen. Before leaving, he took time to carefully arrange some of the victim's belongings, including laying out documents and cash, while also discarding the murder weapon and some of his own clothing. Strangely, the killer left behind an overwhelming amount of forensic evidence. His clothes, including a sweater, a scarf, and a hat, were found in the house. His shoes, identified as a rare type of Slazenger sneakers only sold in South Korea, were left at the scene. Investigators even recovered his DNA and fingerprints, but despite running them through global databases, no match has ever been found. The DNA analysis indicated that the suspect might have mixed East Asian and European ancestry, adding another layer of mystery. Investigators have long struggled to understand the motive behind the murders. The killer did not steal any valuables, and the way he targeted the family members seemed deeply personal. Some theories suggest that he may have had a vendetta against Mikio, who worked in publishing, though no concrete link has been found. Another theory points to the possibility that the murders were random and committed by a mentally unstable individual. Others speculate that the suspect could have been a foreigner or someone with military training, as he managed to evade capture despite leaving so much evidence behind. The lack of an arrest has led to numerous conspiracy theories. Some believe that the suspect was protected, or that law enforcement failed to properly handle the evidence. There are also theories suggesting a professional hit, disguised as a random act of violence, but nothing has been proven. The case has frustrated authorities, especially given the fact that DNA evidence should have led to a resolution. Despite decades of investigation, the Setagaya Family Murders remain unsolved. Every year, on the anniversary of the crime, Japanese authorities renew their appeals to the public, hoping that someone will come forward with new information. The Miyazawa family's relatives continue to seek justice, unable to understand how a killer who left behind so much evidence has never been identified. The case is a chilling reminder that even in a world of advanced forensic science, some crimes remain shrouded in mystery. The Setagaya murders stand as one of the most haunting unsolved killings, with a suspect who vanished into thin air despite leaving his traces behind. Whether the truth will ever be uncovered remains uncertain, but until then, the Miyazawa family's brutal fate continues to haunt those who seek answers. The Kendrick Johnson Case. On January 11, 2013, the body of 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson was discovered inside a rolled-up gym mat in the old gymnasium of Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia. What initially seemed like a tragic accident quickly spiraled into one of the most controversial and mysterious unsolved deaths in recent American history. Despite multiple investigations, independent autopsies, and national attention, the truth about how Kendrick died remains elusive, fueling speculation, allegations of a cover-up, and deep frustration from his family and supporters. According to the official story from law enforcement, Kendrick was attempting to retrieve a pair of shoes that he had stored inside the rolled-up mat. It was suggested that he accidentally fell head-first into the mat and became stuck, ultimately suffocating. The Lowndes County Sheriff's Office ruled his death an accident, and the case was quickly closed. However, Kendrick's parents, along with independent forensic experts, have strongly rejected this explanation, citing disturbing inconsistencies in the evidence. The first red flag was the condition of Kendrick's body. When his parents were finally allowed to see him, they were horrified. His face was severely swollen and discolored, and his body showed signs of possible blunt force trauma. The official autopsy performed by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, concluded that Kendrick died of positional asphyxia, meaning he was unable to breathe due to the way he was trapped in the mat. However, his parents were unconvinced and ordered a second independent autopsy. The results of the second autopsy were shocking. The pathologist found signs of blunt force trauma to Kendrick's neck and determined that his death was likely the result of homicide. Even more disturbingly, when his body was exhumed, his family discovered that all of his internal organs had been removed and replaced with newspaper. The funeral home that handled his body claimed they had received it from the state already in that condition, raising suspicions of foul play and possible tampering with evidence. The controversy deepened when surveillance footage from the school was released. The footage, which was supposed to help clarify Kendrick's movements on the day of his death, only added to the mystery. Large gaps were discovered in the video timeline, with crucial moments missing or heavily distorted. Kendrick was last seen entering the gym, but there was no footage showing how he ended up inside the mat. His parents and many independent investigators believe the tapes may have been edited or manipulated, adding weight to the theory that a cover-up took place. Speculation soon centered on the possibility that Kendrick was murdered and that school officials or law enforcement were involved in hiding the truth. Rumors spread that he had been in a fight with other students prior to his death, and that certain individuals with connections to law enforcement may have played a role in either his death or the destruction of evidence. Despite these allegations, no one has been officially charged, and authorities have repeatedly stood by their original ruling that his death was accidental. Kendrick's parents have fought tirelessly to reopen the case, even filing lawsuits against school officials and law enforcement agencies. They have pointed out that key pieces of evidence, such as bloodstains found near the mats, were never properly investigated. In 2016, the Department of Justice launched a federal investigation into the case, but after 3 years they concluded that there was insufficient evidence to support a criminal prosecution. This decision devastated Kendrick's family, who believed that important details were ignored or buried. The case took another turn in 2021 when Sheriff Ashley Polk announced that he was reopening the investigation. He reviewed thousands of pages of case files, interviewed witnesses, and re-examined evidence. However, in early 2022, the sheriff once again concluded that Kendrick's death was an accident. His family rejected this conclusion, and their fight for justice continues. The death of Kendrick Johnson remains one of the most hotly debated unsolved cases in the United States. Supporters argue that there are too many inconsistencies, too much missing evidence, and too many unanswered questions for this to be written off as an accident. Meanwhile, law enforcement continues to insist that there is no foul play. More than a decade later, Kendrick's family still demands the truth. His case has sparked discussions about racial injustice, police corruption, and the possibility of institutional cover-ups. Whether new evidence will ever come to light remains uncertain, but for Kendrick's parents, the search for justice will never stop. Until the real story is uncovered, the mystery surrounding Kendrick Johnson's death continues to haunt those who believe there is more to the story than what has been officially reported. The Smiley Face Killings Theory. For more than 2 decades, a chilling and controversial theory has circulated about the mysterious drownings of young men across the United States. Dubbed the Smiley Face Killings, this theory suggests that a serial killer, or an organized group of killers, is responsible for the deaths of dozens of college-aged men, many of whom were last seen leaving bars or parties before being found drowned in nearby rivers, lakes, or other bodies of water. While law enforcement agencies have largely dismissed the theory, private investigators and retired detectives continue to push for answers, arguing that these deaths share too many eerie similarities to be coincidences. The theory was first proposed in the late 1990s by 2 retired New York City detectives, Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, along with their colleague Dr. Lee Gilbertson, a criminal justice professor. They noticed that a disturbing pattern was emerging across several states. Young, athletic, and academically successful men were disappearing after nights out drinking, only for their bodies to later be discovered in water. In many of these cases, graffiti of a smiley face was found near where the bodies were believed to have entered the water, leading to the name of the theory. One of the earliest cases linked to the theory was the 1997 disappearance of Patrick McNeil, a Fordham University student who was last seen leaving a bar in Manhattan. His body was later found in the East River, and while police ruled his death an accidental drowning, Gannon and Duarte strongly disagreed. They believed that McNeil had been abducted and murdered, noting inconsistencies in how his body was found, as well as marks suggesting he had been restrained before his death. Since then, over 100 cases in more than 25 cities across the Midwest and Northeast have been linked to the Smiley Face Killings Theory. Many of these deaths share similar circumstances. The victims were young men in their early 20s, mostly college students, who vanished after a night of drinking. Their bodies were almost always found in water, and in some instances they were missing for weeks or even months before being discovered. In most cases, police ruled their deaths as accidental drownings, often attributing them to intoxication and misadventure. Gannon, Duarte, and Gilbertson argue that these cases cannot simply be the result of drunken accidents. They claim that in several instances the victims' bodies showed signs of being held somewhere before being dumped in water. Some of the bodies had low levels of decomposition despite being in the water for extended periods, and in some cases, autopsies revealed unexplained injuries, such as ligature marks or signs of strangulation. These details have fueled speculation that the victims were kidnapped, held captive, and later murdered before being placed in the water to make their deaths look like drownings. The smiley face graffiti found near many of the crime scenes has led some to believe that this is the work of a network of killers, rather than just one person. The theory suggests that this group is highly organized, using the same methods and targeting similar victims in multiple states. If true, this would mean the Smiley Face Killers are one of the most elusive and dangerous criminal organizations in modern history. Despite these alarming patterns, most law enforcement agencies and the FBI have rejected the theory, stating that there is no concrete evidence linking these deaths to a serial killer or organized group. Officials argue that college-aged men are statistically more likely to drown due to alcohol consumption and risky behavior, particularly in cold weather regions where many of these cases have occurred. Some forensic experts believe that the injuries noted in certain cases could be explained by post-mortem damage from water currents or debris. Still, families of the victims and supporters of the theory refuse to accept that all these deaths were mere accidents. In some cases, families have paid for independent autopsies, which have sometimes contradicted official findings. For example, the 2006 death of Chris Jenkins, a University of Minnesota student, was initially ruled an accidental drowning, but after years of pressure from his family, authorities reclassified it as a homicide based on new evidence suggesting foul play. Cases like Jenkins have only fueled suspicion that law enforcement may have prematurely dismissed similar cases without thorough investigations. The Smiley Face Killings Theory remains one of the most controversial and debated unsolved mysteries in the United States. If the theory is correct, then a shadowy group of serial killers could still be operating, targeting young men and leaving little forensic evidence behind. If the theory is incorrect, then it represents one of the most complex examples of pattern seeking in crime investigations, where unrelated drownings were linked together by coincidence rather than true criminal activity. To this day, no definitive proof has emerged to confirm or debunk the theory completely. Investigators like Gannon and Duarte continue to search for answers, while families of the victims demand deeper investigations. Until conclusive evidence is found, the Smiley Face killings remain one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries, leaving many to wonder whether a hidden predator, or predators, are still out there, waiting for their next victim. The Missy Bevers murder. On April 18, 2016, in the early hours of the morning, fitness instructor Terry Missy Bevers arrived at the Creekside Church of Christ in Midlothian, Texas, to prepare for her 5 a.m. boot camp class. Just minutes later, she was brutally murdered by an unknown assailant. The killing shocked the quiet town, and despite extensive video footage of the suspect, the case remains one of the most puzzling and chilling unsolved murders in modern American history. Surveillance cameras inside the church captured a figure dressed in tactical police gear, including a helmet, gloves, and heavy body armor, roaming the hallways before Missy arrived. The suspect was seen methodically opening doors and breaking windows, moving in a deliberate and eerily calm manner. The footage also showed an unusual gait. The person appeared to walk with a limp or an odd stance, leading some to believe they had an injury or a medical condition. Missy entered the church around 4:20 a.m., completely unaware that someone was already inside. At some point, the suspect ambushed her, attacking her with a blunt object, possibly a hammer or another heavy tool. When police arrived, they found her dead, suffering from severe trauma to the head and upper body. There were no signs of forced entry into the building other than the damage caused by the suspect, and nothing appeared to have been stolen, ruling out robbery as a motive. From the start, the case baffled investigators. The church's surveillance video provided a clear look at the suspect's clothing and movements, yet their identity remained completely unknown. The biggest mystery was whether Missy was specifically targeted, or if the crime was a random attack. If it was premeditated, why was the killer dressed in tactical gear, And why did they break into the church before Missy arrived? If it was a burglary gone wrong, why would someone wear such an elaborate disguise and carry out the attack so brutally? Investigators turned their focus to Missy's personal life, hoping to find clues that could explain who would want to harm her. She was a well-known and well-liked fitness instructor, but some details about her personal life raised questions. Shortly before her murder, she had reportedly received creepy and suspicious messages from an unknown person on LinkedIn. Police did not publicly disclose the content of the messages, but they considered them significant enough to explore whether Missy had a stalker or if someone had been following her. Authorities also looked into Missy's marriage and personal relationships. Some rumors suggested she had been involved in an extramarital affair, and investigators examined her phone and social media for potential suspects. However, despite multiple interviews, no clear suspect emerged from her personal circle. One of the most talked about theories involved Missy's husband, Brandon Bevers, and his family. At the time of the murder, Brandon was on a fishing trip out of town, and his alibi was confirmed. However, some internet sleuths speculated about his father, Randy Bevers, after noticing that he had a similar limp to the one seen in the surveillance footage. Additionally, just days after the murder, Randy had taken bloodied clothes to a dry cleaner. He claimed the stains were from a dog injury, and police later stated the blood did not match Missy's. Ultimately, investigators cleared both Brandon and Randy of involvement in the crime. Another bizarre twist in the case was the unusual storm that occurred on the night of the murder. Heavy rain and lightning had knocked out some security cameras around the church, reducing the amount of footage available from the surrounding area. This led some to believe the killer might have known about the weather conditions and used them as a cover. Despite national media coverage and thousands of tips, Missy Bevers' murder remains unsolved. The tactical gear worn by the suspect, their calm and calculated movements, and the lack of any clear motive make this case one of the most mysterious homicides in recent memory. The surveillance footage, though chilling, has not led to any arrests, and police have not been able to determine whether Missy's murder was personal, random, or the result of a burglary gone wrong. The case remains active, with law enforcement still hoping for new leads. Missy's family continues to seek justice, frustrated that her killer has never been identified despite the presence of such compelling evidence. Many theories have circulated over the years, from a hired hit to a revenge killing to a random crime of opportunity, but none have led to definitive answers. For now, the Missy Bevers murder remains one of America's most haunting unsolved crimes, with the eerie image of the unknown killer in tactical gear still lingering in the minds of those seeking justice. Until new evidence emerges or someone comes forward with a critical clue, the case remains an enduring mystery, leaving the question, who killed Missy Bevers and why?